Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we look at what's really going on in the world of the BRICS. Now today I want to talk about the schism that developed in the EU between members in Eastern Europe who joined in the last 20 years over sanctions policy on Russia. In the light of the recent electoral turbulence witnessed in Romania, Moldova and Georgia, it's pertinent to recall the significant anniversary. 20 years ago, the dispute over vote counting in the Ukrainian presidential election led to the Orange Revolution, which is widely regarded as a starting point of the EU's efforts to establish control over the post-Soviet space. In the autumn of 2024, similar sentiments were expressed in regard to the confrontation with Russia, which seeks to preserve its sphere of influence, albeit now in the context of other nations, with vastly different historical settings. In May 2004, the first wave of EU expansion to the East took place. Just a few months later, the new Europe, the former socialist countries that joined the European Union, loudly declared their special position within the EU, actively supporting the Orange Revolution. Poland played a leading role in this, for which the separation of the Ukraine from Russia was one of the strategic goals and rooted in geopolitical thinking. The Baltic states, particularly Lithuania, expressed solidarity with this position. Now before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website scobricsinsight.com to further develop it. You can do this by making a small donation, and you click on the bottom, thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and I still thank everybody who has donated and continues to donate. Thanks for watching anyway. The term Old Europe was first used in 2003 by the US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld to describe the differences between the old and new NATO members in the context of the preparations for the invasion of Iraq. And that drew much criticism, but it proved to be quite accurate. The concept fostered a notable degree of collaboration between Old Europe and Moscow, primarily in the fields of trade and politics. During this period, France and Germany adopted a cautious stance, refraining from any actions that could potentially provoke Russia. Plus, the prospect of Ukraine joining the EU, whose interests Warsaw had volunteered respect, was not a priority for the European, due to the country's distance from the membership criteria and the freshness of the impressions of the first wave of enlargement. Now, during the 9-year period between the first and the second Maidans, the EU's policy underwent significant changes. In 2013-2014, Brussels adopted a much more consolidated and assertive stance, declaring that Ukraine's association with the EU and multilateral formats for discussing the association, particularly with Russia's involvement, were non-negotiable. In contrast to its role as an impartial mediator in 2004-2005, the EU became an active participant in Ukraine's political confrontation, contributing to its radicalization. The special role of France and Germany in the EU's contacts with Russia remained, as evidenced by the emergence of the Normandy format and the Minsk agreement that tried to resolve the situation in the Donbass. However, that was not entirely convincing, as we discovered later. They were pursuing goals far from those that they declared of peace, and were actually there just for the rearming of Ukraine. Now, in the following years, Moscow's relations with Paris and Berlin deteriorated rapidly. The big European country tactically switched from a policy of engagement with Russia to a course of aggression and containment. Now, the reasons for this shift were twofold: security concerns related to the conflict in the Donbass and the growing crisis phenomena in their domestic politics, which caused concern amongst the traditional elites, and particularly the strengthening of extra systematic forces, particularly the so-called far right. There were concerns that Russia could take advantage of this situation to interfere in the domestic policies of France, Germany, etc., against this backdrop of similar and still unproven, in fact they have been totally unproven, accusations in the United States after the election of Donald Trump as president, the Russiagate farce, etc. Now, these concerns played an important role in alienating old Europe from Russia, the European bureaucracy decided the principle of more Europe to be the solution to almost all its pressing problems, which means greater integration within the European Union and constant expansion outwards. From the point of view of the Euro bureaucracy, the European path is the only development option for the former countries of the Warsaw Pact and former Soviet republics that remain outside the EU for now, Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, etc. I mean, within the EU itself, the prospect of further expansion has effectively ceased to be a subject of discussion. While there may be some voices expressing opposition, the general direction has been set. During the autumn of 2024, the EU demonstrated its commitment to these principles during the presidential elections and referendum on a constitutional amendments in Moldova. The fact that the majority of the citizens living in the country spoke out against both the President Sandu and the accession to the European Union was explained to the public as a result of aggressive election interference by Moscow and was part of a wider confrontation of Russia interfering in elections in every country in Europe. The EU also regards Georgia as a theatre for this confrontation, and when the Georgian Dream Party, which is regarded as pro-Russian in the West, won the parliamentary elections, the European Parliament took unprecedented measures demanding a repeat of the parliamentary elections and sanctions against the leaders of the party of Georgia Dream. In response, of course, Georgia suspended negotiations on joining the EU, and its Prime Minister, Iraqi Kobahadze, stated that Georgia's accession to the European Union will not occur under duress, but will be achieved through a robust democratic system and the development of a robust economy. He said Georgia doesn't reject the European path in principle. However, the EU perceives the endeavour to enter on its own terms as actions that favour Russia. Anything it doesn't agree with is favour of Russia. So this overarching strategic objective in the post-Soviet space is currently regarded as ousting Russia, a course of action that aligns with the interests of the European Union and its member nations. Now, this approach mirrors the foreign policy logic that guided Poland and its like-minded countries of the New Europe 20 years ago. In 2004, Warsaw waged war with Moscow for influence in the Ukraine, into which the EU was only drawn reluctantly. Today, containing Russia is one of the main goals of EU expansion. However, it's important to note that there's another key element at play. The countries of the Visegrad Group, which was united by their transition from Soviet socialism to Western-style democracy and a market economy, from the EU's perspective, the countries of the Visegrad Group have achieved the most success in this area. They, well, except Slovakia, were the first post-socialist countries to be granted NATO membership, which was perceived as the first step towards integration into Western institutions. However, it's notable that these countries recently Eurosceptics have gained power, and these are seeking to capitalise on the benefits of EU membership while pursuing agendas that diversify and diverge from the EU's general direction. I mean, despite their shared perspectives on subjects such as the primacy of national law over pan-European law, migration, green energy, and the sharing of conservative values, these forces diverged in their understanding of the geopolitical context. That, as a result, two different perspectives have been formulated, Polish and Hungarian. While Poland's foreign policy is consistent with a confrontational stance against Russia, even if it destroys their economy, that's what they're going to do. Hungary, on the other hand, under the leadership of Viktor Orban, adopts a very different approach, which is sometimes characterised as pro-Russian with the current political climate of the EU. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, given that Orban belongs to the same cohort of politicians as the leading figures of Poland's Law and Justice Party. I mean, all of them fought fiercely against the socialist regimes in their own countries and the post-communist forces that they saw as the main beneficiaries of the transition to democracy in the late 1980s, early 90s. In the case of the Polish elites, opposition to communism has seamlessly transitioned to opposition to anything to do with Russia, displaying striking parallels to the worldview of the American neocon elites across party lines. It's important to note that Poland's accession to the EU was not only accompanied by its anti-Russian agenda, but it's also its commitment to representing the interests of the United States in the European Union. On the eve of its accession, Poland declared that it would become the EU's closest ally in the United States' closest ally of the US in the EU after Great Britain. However, after Brexit rendered this redundant. Now, the ongoing confrontation between democracies and autocracies, particularly the armed conflict in UK, is a key part of the broader American-Chinese rivalry. As such, Poland's position is likely to remain in high demand even after the change in the administration of the United States. In terms of Hungary under Orban, a pragmatic approach is adopted which does not offer any benefits to Hungary and Europe or as a whole in terms of confrontation with Russia. Hungarians hold a fairly sympathetic view of Russia, but they're not convinced that the conflict in the Ukraine can be resolved by forcing Moscow to capitulate. They are convinced that participating in futile attempts at this will, at a minimum, make their lives notably worse. These positions enjoy support beyond the borders of Poland and Hungary, and the Baltic and Northern countries are in favour of the first position, while the Danubians basin countries support the second position. It's premature to talk about the formation of the two blocks of New Europe into oppositions based on their attitude towards the Russian threat. Rather, they're clubs of like-minded people which can conventionally be called the Baltics and the Danube clubs. So there's not so much thing as a united Europe, as they say. Due to the geography, the Baltic countries are of particular importance to the plans of the US and NATO to confront Russia in Europe, but that's not the only issue. The political climate in these countries has contributed to their own active engagement in the confrontation. The Danube Club, which is in opposition to the EU's general line, generally consists of Hungary and Slovakia, with Croatia joining in. Austria and the Czech Republic are getting closer and closer to that position, and outside the EU, Serbia shares this particular viewpoint. So only time will tell which one will win out as the United Front in Brussels has crumbled. Now, it is conceivable that in the future, the European configuration, the countries of the Danube Club could become Russia's primary partners in dialogue in the EU, emulating the old role that all Europe played 20 years ago. However, what form will this take? Well, a different type of interaction. Russia's special relations with Berlin were a legacy of the time of the great European powers, which is now an anachronism. I mean, Germany and France no longer have any real power because they renounced it in their aspiration for the united Europe, and they've transferred this responsibility to the idiots like Sandu, like Karyakajas and von der Leyen, whereas the countries of the Danube group do not aspire to a similar level of influence and they have a far greater freedom of manoeuvre. Should the European Union decide against the confrontational approach with Russia, opting for a gradual restoration of ties, these countries could assume the roles of mediator and serve as a useful channel of dialogue. Anyway, that's the situation. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.